If there is one antagonist in the anime slash manga community that everyone can agree is one of the greatest antagonists of all time, is Johan Liebert. This is an antagonist that you probably have heard whenever people talk about antagonists or when people talk about certain individuals that are considered to be very good manipulators. And that is always the category that Johan is always placed at, and it's for a good reason. What makes Johan such a very dangerous individual and probably one of the most dangerous antagonists is not only his manipulation, but just how very good he was at hiding his psychopathic behavior. And I think that's something that's also worth mentioning, is the fact that Johan is clearly a very insane person who has very insane ideals, and some of the things that he does in this series of monsters can be considered as the pure definition of true evil or evil in human form. And there is a few moments in this series that showcase just how evil Johan Liebert is, but there's always been a moment in the Monster series that has always stayed in my head, and it's a scene that I cannot forget, and that is the scene involving Johan and an investigator named Richard. What makes this scene all the more dark and unsettling is how Johan was able to push this man to his limits, how he was able to end this man's life without him having to lift one finger. But of course, before we talk about this scene, we need to still talk about Johan, because there's still a lot of things that are worth mentioning about this antagonist. So like I mentioned earlier, Johan is very good at not showing his evil intentions, and it is through his facade of being shown as a very charismatic and well-mannered man. And because of this, he uses it to his advantage in order to get people to be involved in his schemes. And the thing is that not many people know that they're being manipulated until it's very late. Manipulation and tricking people is one thing, but Johan goes the extra mile to show us just how evil he truly is, and that is by him showing that he has no issues with taking a person's life. Whenever Monster is being talked about in the community, there's always been this kind of discussion that states that whenever Johan is around or whenever there's a scene involving him, eventually someone does end up dying. And that is because, once again, Johan has no problems with killing, since he believes that death is just simply a normal thing, that everyone is going to experience death at some point in their lives, so it really shouldn't be a big deal. And this also contributes to the fact that he has another ideal in which he believes that there's nothing really of value in life. He believes that life is completely meaningless, and that there's nothing special about anybody being born in life, because at the end of the day, death is around the corner. You can quickly see that Johan's viewpoints on life is very twisted, and he believes that death is pretty much the only thing that should be the main focus, and that is something that you can quickly see whenever Johan's taking someone's life. He shows very little regret or sadness whenever he kills somebody that he needed to kill, and in some cases the death of that person is unfortunately very slow and suffering, showing us just how psychotic Johan is. And to make it even more terrifying, most of the deaths that Johan is involved in aren't by pure accident. No, these are deaths that Johan has calculated and has premeditated before it happened. So now that you know a few things about Johan, let's jump right back into the scene involving him and the investigator named Richard. Now, Richard was actually assigned to take care of a case involving Fahren, in which it seemed that this person took their own lives. However, this investigator is very quick to realize that Johan may have something to do with this person's death, and later on he soon starts to put the pieces together that Johan may be responsible for other people's death as well. Realizing this could be a problem, Johan decides to take care of Richard once and for all. So Johan decides to meet Richard and have a conversation with him, and it was during this conversation that he brings up an incident that happened involving Richard that involved the investigator taking a teenager's life away due to that teenager being the prime suspect of very horrible crimes. This teenager's name being Stefan Joss. Now, at the time, it was stated that Richard was facing an alcohol problem, which could have resulted in him being drunk when this was all happening. However, you can quickly see that this conversation is not a conversation that Richard wants to have. Not only that, but he becomes even more unsettled when Johan seems to have done his research, as Johan knows that Richard has a daughter, and it seems that Richard wants to see his daughter, which just showcases how intelligent Johan really is and how he's able to get information about the persons that he is targeting. And of course, because of this becomes even more dark once they reach at the rooftop, in which Johan showcased his manipulation tactics on how he was able to put Richard in a corner and completely isolate him, as in these moments, Johan tells Richard that he finds it hard to believe that Richard was drunk when he shot the teenager, and states that Richard wasn't drunk when that was all happening. No, Richard was sober when he decided to end that teenager's life. Of course, despite Richard desperately trying to deny that to be the case, sadly Johan has the upper hand because he presses first, stating to Richard as to how he could possibly have intentions of of seeing his own daughter after what he did. Not only that, but when Richard tried desperately to once again state that he had no intentions of killing the teenager and that he wasn't sober, Johan pushed him further, asking Richard why he's lying to himself and trying desperately to forget about that moment, knowing full well that he's the one who knows exactly what happened because he was there to do the deed that he did. And then later on, he asked Richard if what he did was correct. Did he have the rights to kill that boy? And he goes on to say that if he was even able to confirm that that boy was the actual suspect of those crimes that he was being accused of. It's in these moments that you can quickly see that Johan already has Richard in full control, and that no matter what Richard says or does in these moments, it's pointless, as all Johan has to do is just keep manipulating him by using his emotions and his guilt towards this whole situation. And as if this couldn't get even more evil, Johan pulls out a bottle of liquor in which he tells Richard if he wants to have a drink, using Richard's alcohol problem to just showcase that at this point Richard is no longer somebody that he needs to worry about because he already did what he had to do, and that is to get rid of this person that was going to bring him problems in the future. Ultimately, this will all end with the announcement that Richard took his own life, and that is sadly how Richard's death is portrayed, just by simply him ending his own life without many people realizing that it wasn't just because of that. It was somebody that was able to use his guilt of something that happened in the past that drove him to make that desperate decision. And I think at this point it just really showcases that Johan really is perfectly fine using people's trauma and using people's guilt for his own benefit. It was very clear in these moments for Johan that Richard was going to be a problem if he didn't take care of him very soon, because Richard was smart enough to be able to link Johan to many other crimes that he had committed. That is something that Johan did not want to let happen. He didn't want Richard to find out all the things that he has done. So for Johan, this is something that had to be done. But of course, Johan didn't really see an issue with it, and in fact, you can quickly see in these moments that he really was having a great time doing all this to Richard, breaking his mind, using his guilt, his alcohol problems, and his family against Richard. You could simply interpret this as Johan just adding more oil to the fire, knowing full well that if he kept pushing Richard and kept doing this to Richard at all times, Richard would eventually break and will make a decision that he probably wouldn't have made if his mind was in the right place. Unfortunately, his mind wasn't in the right place at this time, and it was very clear that Richard was just confused, he was lost, and at that point he just didn't know what to do with his life anymore, as it seems that no matter how many times Richard tried to forget about that whole incident, tried to forget everything that happened in the past, it all was pointless since Johan kept bringing it up. And it seems that his attempts of trying to have a better life or changing the things about his life to make it better, it was all completely wasted by this heartless monster who ruined all that with no hesitation whatsoever. And I think these moments of this series just really showcases how in reality, if you think about it, this could actually be implemented in real life. The most disturbing about this is that there are some people in this world that are actually pure evil. They're the true definition of evil, and while they may show it or not, there is people that are genuinely evil. There is people that are perfectly fine breaking other people for their own sick pleasure. And I think in these moments, Johan just perfectly shows us how if someone's able to manipulate somebody correctly, they're not only able to break a person's mind, but they're able to make that person commit very drastic things that normally that person wouldn't do. And that's really the most terrifying thing about this, is how anybody has the abilities to do this if they have the intentions to do it. And this moment right here in the Monster series just really showcased why everyone thinks that Johan is probably one of the most evilest antagonists of all time. He was a man that had no problem bringing pain and suffering to people and didn't value human life whatsoever. And while this wasn't the only moment in the series that showcased just how much of a terrible evil human being Johan is, it's probably one of the most impactful moments in the series, because even though we as the viewer or reader know that Johan was the one responsible for Richard's death, Richard's family isn't probably going to think that. Richard's family is probably just going to think that he just simply succumbed to the alcohol problem that he had, and that's why he did the things that he did. I think it's really sad to see Richard, a man who truly did want to change, not being able to show how hard he was trying to change to his daughter and to his wife. And overall, I think that's what really impacted me the most, is the fact that this person was wanting to change, but sadly he never got the chance to showcase that due to him being broken by a person who values nothing in life whatsoever. But even though Johan is a terrible person and an evil human being, that's what makes him such a very dangerous and impactful antagonist. How he was able to do a lot of things that not only impacted the story but also impacted the characters. I think that's what really truly shows that this antagonist was a big threat and was somebody that had to be taken down. And that's pretty much where I'm going to end the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.